"What you want to do to me, cowboy?" the Apache woman asked. But the rancher took action, not words. The sun was high in the Arizona sky, casting a golden glow over the dry, dusty land. The heat pressed down on the rancher, Thomas Hale, as he worked tirelessly to repair the fence that marked the edge of his property. Sweat ran down his brow, and the sound of his hammer striking wooden posts echoed through the empty fields. Life on the frontier was not easy. Every day demanded hard work, patience, and careful attention to the land. Thomas had grown used to this routine, and he believed that his days would continue quietly, much like the ones before. But the frontier had a way of changing life in an instant. Thomas had been born and raised in these lands. He knew the desert's secrets, the hidden springs, the dangerous cliffs, and the trails animals and humans alike used to move across the wide stretches of earth. He also knew the dangers that came with the territory. Conflicts between settlers and the Apache tribes were common. Stories of theft, violence, and broken trust traveled fast, and everyone learned early that a wrong word could lead to serious trouble. Yet Thomas had a sense of fairness that guided his actions. He believed in doing what was right, even when others did not. On this particular afternoon, as Thomas hammered another post into the ground, he noticed a thin trail of smoke rising on the horizon. The movement caught his attention immediately. Smoke could mean a campfire, but it could also signal a fire that was out of control. Thomas squinted against the sun and studied the smoke carefully. It did not move erratically like a wildfire might. Instead, it lingered in one place, steady and thin. Still, he knew it was worth investigating. Fires in the dry season could turn deadly in minutes, and he had no intention of letting a situation get out of control. Mounting his horse, Thomas rode toward the source of the smoke, careful to keep his speed slow so he could see what lay ahead. The land stretched endlessly before him, with rocky outcrops and sparse vegetation breaking the monotony of the dry plains. He followed the trail, alert to any movement that might indicate animals or humans. After a short ride, he saw what he had not expected, a small Apache camp. It was clear that the people who had been there faced trouble. A broken wagon lay on its side, its wheels splintered, and supplies were scattered across the ground. Signs of struggle were visible in the trampled grass and broken branches. From the edge of the riverbank, a young Apache woman stood, watching him with calm, unwavering eyes. Her posture was strong and proud, showing no fear despite the precarious situation around her. Her eyes met Thomas's as he approached, and in a voice that carried both challenge and caution, she asked, "What you wanna do to me, cowboy?" The words were sharp, a test rather than a plea. Thomas felt the weight of the question. He knew that many men in his place might have drawn their guns or shouted threats. But Thomas had learned early that actions often spoke louder than words. He dismounted his horse slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He reached up and removed his rifle from his shoulder, placing it gently on the ground. It was a gesture of peace, a silent way of saying he meant no harm. The woman, whose name was Ayana, studied him carefully. She had faced many men in her life, and most had been unkind. Yet Thomas's calm demeanor, the careful way he handled himself, told her something different. She did not lower her guard, but she allowed herself to watch, to see what he would do next. Thomas moved toward the broken wagon, his eyes scanning the area for any other dangers. The younger boy, presumably Ayana's brother, hid behind a rock, peeking out cautiously. Thomas smiled gently at him, a simple gesture meant to convey trust. Then he knelt by the wagon, inspecting the damage. The wheel was splintered, the axle cracked, and the wood worn from use. Repairing it would not be easy, but Thomas did not hesitate. He worked with care, his hands skilled from years of labor, tightening bolts, replacing broken parts, and ensuring the wagon would be usable again. Yana observed him closely, noting each movement. Her people had been trained to survive on the harsh lands, to trust cautiously and act decisively. She had learned that words could be deceptive, but actions could reveal true intentions. Thomas's actions spoke volumes. He was not just a stranger. He was someone who had chosen to help without demand or expectation. As he worked, Thomas spoke softly, not to command, but to communicate. He asked simple questions about their journey, about how long they had been traveling, and about what had happened to them. He listened carefully, giving them space to speak if they wished. Yana did not answer at first, but over time she began to provide small pieces of information, cautious and measured. She explained that they had been traveling when bandits attacked, stealing supplies and horses. She had managed to protect her younger brother, but they had been left stranded with no food or water for the next day's travel. Thomas nodded, understanding the danger they had faced. He offered them water from his saddlebag, and they accepted gratefully. He did not rush, did not force them to trust him. He simply acted, providing help in the simplest and most effective way he could. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the land. The heat of the day softened, but Thomas continued his work, determined to restore the wagon before nightfall. Ayanna watched, her respect for him growing with each careful movement. She realized that he was not a man who acted out of fear or pride. He was a man guided by principle. By the time the wagon was repaired, the sun had set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Thomas looked up, wiped the sweat from his brow, and extended a hand toward the young boy to help him onto the wagon safely. Ayanna nodded, her expression a mix of caution and gratitude. Thomas's actions had not only repaired their wagon, but had also begun to build a fragile bridge of trust. As they prepared to leave the riverbank, Thomas ensured that they had enough food and water to continue their journey safely. He did not expect thanks or recognition. His satisfaction came from knowing that he had done the right thing. Gianna and her brother mounted the wagon, ready to move forward with the confidence that someone on the frontier still believed in fairness and humanity. The ride back to his ranch was quiet, but in that quiet there was understanding. Words were unnecessary. The events of the day had spoken clearly. Thomas had chosen action over confrontation, kindness over fear, and integrity over indifference. In a land where danger was constant and trust was rare, such actions were powerful. When they arrived near the ranch, Thomas guided them to a safe spot where they could rest before continuing their journey. Yana studied him once more, noting the quiet strength in his demeanor. She had expected hostility, but instead she had found protection. She had expected threats, but she had found patience. She had expected words, but she had found action. As night fell and stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, Thomas returned to his home, exhausted but content. He knew that the frontier could be harsh, unforgiving, and often cruel. Yet in that moment, he felt a sense of peace. He had chosen to act rightly, and in doing so had made a difference. The day's events would not be forgotten. For Ayanna and her brother, the memory of a rancher who had chosen action over words would remain with them for a lifetime. And for Thomas, the experience reinforced a simple truth. Courage is not always loud, and strength is not always violent. Sometimes the bravest choice is to act with integrity, even when the world expects anything else. The frontier was vast, uncertain, and full of challenges. But in the quiet of that summer evening, amid the dust and the heat, Thomas Hale had proven that even in a land shaped by fear and survival, humanity could still shine through. His actions were small in the grand scale of the frontier, but for those who experienced them, they carried meaning far beyond words. And so, the sun set over the Arizona plains, the repaired wagon ready for the journey ahead, and a silent understanding passed between the rancher and the Apache girl, a moment that would echo far longer than the fleeting hours of the day. The evening air was cooler now, and the Arizona sky was painted in deep oranges and purples as Thomas Hale guided the repaired wagon along the dusty trail back toward his ranch. The land stretched endlessly, with the occasional clump of sagebrush and the silhouettes of distant mesas breaking the horizon. For Ayanna and her younger brother, the ride was a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They were safe for the moment, but the world around them was unpredictable and often cruel. Ayanna studied the rancher carefully. She had grown up learning to read people quickly because hesitation or misplaced trust could mean disaster. Most of the men she had encountered were loud, impatient, or aggressive. Thomas was different. He did not boast about his strength or make empty promises. His actions were quiet, measured, and thoughtful. That quietness, she realized, was more powerful than words could ever be. As they traveled, the younger boy, whose name was Kai, finally spoke. His voice was small, hesitant. "Will they come after us again?" he asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Thomas shook his head gently. "Not if you stay close to me and keep moving carefully," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and comforting. He did not promise safety because he could not, but he offered assurance that came from experience and careful thinking. That was enough for Kai to relax a little, though he still clutched the edge of the wagon tightly. The ride continued in silence for some time. Thomas kept his eyes on the trail, scanning for any signs of danger. He noticed tracks in the dirt, some from horses, some from small animals, and others from people. Each track told a story, and Thomas had learned over the years to read them. The marks of hurried movement suggested the bandits who had attacked Ayana's family were nearby, or at least had passed through not long before. Thomas decided to take a slightly longer route to avoid possible encounters. It added time, but it kept them safer. As night fell, the sky turned a deep velvet, and stars began to twinkle across the vast expanse. Thomas guided the wagon to a small clearing where they could rest. He set up a simple campfire, careful to keep it small so it would not draw unwanted attention. Ayana and Kai stayed close, watching him move with practiced skill. He handed them small pieces of bread and water. The food was simple, but it was enough to sustain them until they could reach the ranch. Ayana finally spoke. Why are you helping us?" Her voice was cautious but sincere. "Other men would have left us or worse." Thomas looked at her quietly. He did not answer immediately. He wanted to choose his words carefully. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "I can't control what others do, but I can choose how I act, and today helping you is the right choice." The simplicity of his answer surprised Ayana. She had grown up hearing complicated excuses for betrayal or cruelty. Few people acted without expecting something in return. Thomas's honesty, his straightforward approach, made her want to trust him, though she was careful not to let her guard down completely. The night deepened, and the desert around them became quiet. Even the usual sounds of wildlife seemed muted. The calm was soothing, but it also reminded Ayana that they were far from any other safety. Thomas noticed her tension and tried to ease it. He spoke quietly about the land, pointing out the shapes of distant mountains and the movement of stars in the sky. His stories were simple, about places he had seen, animals he had encountered, and the rhythms of life on the frontier. Ayana listened, intrigued. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. The world around her was still dangerous, but in this moment she could breathe without constant fear. Her brother Kai leaned against her side, his eyelids growing heavy with sleep. Thomas kept watch through the night, alert for any signs of danger, but nothing approached. Morning arrived with soft pink light, and Thomas stirred the camp, preparing for the journey to his ranch. He offered Ayana and Kai more food and water, careful to make sure they were ready for the next leg of the trip. "We're not far from the ranch now," he told them. "Just a few hours more and you can rest properly." Ayana nodded, appreciating the reassurance. She understood that being close to the ranch meant more than just physical safety. It meant access to supplies, knowledge, and people who could help protect her family. Yet, even with this knowledge, she felt a cautious worry. The world beyond the ranch was still unpredictable, and encounters with hostile people could happen at any moment. As they approached the outskirts of Thomas's property, he slowed the wagon and pointed out landmarks along the way. "See that rock formation?" he said. "It's easy to get lost if you don't notice it. Keep it in mind if you ever travel this path again." His guidance was gentle but precise. He wanted them to learn, not just follow blindly. Finally, they arrived at the ranch. Thomas opened the gate and led the wagon inside. The land was familiar and safe, with fences marking boundaries and barns storing supplies. The ranch was quiet, except for the low sounds of animals in the distance. It was a small haven in a land that could be unforgiving. Inside the ranch, Thomas helped Ayana and Kai dismount. He guided them to a shaded area near the barn where they could rest. He brought them food and fresh water, making sure they were comfortable before turning to handle his own work. Even though he had just helped them, his day was far from over. Ranch work required constant attention, and Thomas balanced helping others with caring for his own responsibilities. As the day wore on, word of their arrival spread quietly. Ayana and Kai observed the ranch's operations, noting the careful management of livestock and crops. Thomas worked with patience, showing them the methods he used to keep the ranch running smoothly. It was a lesson in diligence and resilience, qualities that Ayana admired. Despite the safety of the ranch, Ayana remained cautious. She had been trained to protect herself and her brother at all costs. She observed Thomas's actions, looking for any signs of dishonesty or hidden motives, but she found none. Every movement, every word, every decision he made was consistent with the man she had seen at the river. Thomas acted with integrity, whether others were watching or not. As the afternoon approached, Thomas allowed Ayanna and Kai to explore the ranch under his supervision. They learned about the animals, the crops, and the careful routines that kept the land productive. Ayanna began to see that life on a ranch required skill, patience, and an understanding of the land's rhythms. She appreciated how Thomas respected the land and its resources, and she realized that this respect extended to people as well. Throughout the day, Thomas avoided making demands or giving orders unnecessarily. He treated Ayanna and Kai as capable individuals, not as helpless children. He offered guidance and assistance, but allowed them to make choices and learn from experience. This approach built trust more effectively than any words could. Ayanna began to feel that she could rely on him, not because he demanded it, but because his actions consistently showed care and fairness. As evening approached, Thomas prepared a simple meal for the three of them. They ate together near the barn, the quiet sounds of the ranch surrounding them. Ayanna and Kai began to relax more fully, laughing quietly at small jokes and sharing stories of their travels. Thomas listened attentively, asking questions that encouraged them to speak without fear of judgment. By the time night fell, a sense of calm settled over the ranch. The stars shone brightly in the clear desert sky, and the sounds of nocturnal animals filled the air. Thomas kept watch again, alert and attentive, ensuring that no harm would come to his guests. Ayanna and Kai slept peacefully for the first time in days, comforted by the safety and care Thomas had provided. The experience of the past 2 days had left a deep impression on Ayanna. She had encountered danger, fear, and uncertainty, yet she had also seen kindness, patience, and integrity. Thomas had chosen to act without expectation, to help without demand, and to protect without seeking reward. These were qualities that Ayanna had seldom witnessed in the frontier, where survival often required cunning and aggression. By the following morning, Ayanna and Kai were ready to continue their journey. Thomas prepared them with supplies and guidance, ensuring they could travel safely back to their family or community. Before they left, Ayanna spoke quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for helping us when no one else would." Thomas smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just remember to help others when you can. That's how the world becomes a better place, even in small ways." With that, Ayanna and Kai departed, carrying with them the memory of a rancher who had chosen action over words, courage over fear, and kindness over indifference. Thomas watched them go, knowing that the land was still full of challenges, but that the choices he had made had created a small ripple of safety and trust in an unpredictable world. As Thomas returned to his daily work, he reflected on the lessons of the past 2 days. Life on the frontier required constant vigilance, hard work, and careful decisions. But it also required integrity and courage, not the kind measured by guns or strength, but the kind measured by actions and choices. His day-to-day work, combined with his decision to help Ayanna and Kai, was a quiet testament to the power of doing what is right, even when it is difficult or unpopular. And so the ranch continued to thrive, the land continued to stretch under the endless sky, and the memory of a man who acted with quiet courage remained with those whose lives he had touched, teaching them that true strength is found not in words, but in consistent, meaningful action. The morning sun rose over Thomas Hale's ranch, casting a warm glow over the fences, barns, and grazing animals. The land seemed peaceful, but the frontier rarely stayed quiet for long. Word traveled faster than the wind in these parts, and Thomas knew that helping Ayanna and her brother would not go unnoticed. Even small acts of kindness could be viewed as unusual or even dangerous in a world where fear and suspicion often ruled people's actions. Thomas went about his morning chores as usual, feeding the animals, checking fences, and inspecting the crops. He moved with practiced ease, his thoughts partly on the ranch and partly on the potential reactions of his neighbors. He had chosen to act rightly, but he could not ignore that others might misunderstand or even resent his decisions. Still, he did not regret what he had done. Helping Ayanna and Kai was the right thing, and he would stand by that choice, no matter the consequences. As the day wore on, visitors began to arrive at the edge of the ranch. At first, it was just a few neighbors, curious about what had happened. Soon, however, more men gathered, their faces showing skepticism, suspicion, and a touch of anger. Rumors had spread quickly. The rancher had been seen with an Apache woman and a young boy. In the minds of many townspeople, that meant trouble. The first man to speak was a rancher named Jed, a stout man with a booming voice and a tendency to act before thinking. "Thomas," he called, approaching the main gate, "I hear you're picking sides now, helping them of all people." His words were sharp, meant to provoke. Thomas looked up calmly, brushing dust from his hands. "I'm picking what's right," he said simply. There was no anger in his voice, no challenge, just the quiet certainty of a man who knew what he had done was correct. Jed's face turned red with frustration. "You're putting yourself and your ranch at risk. Everyone knows the dangers of trusting people from the tribes. You'll invite trouble and don't expect me or anyone else to help if it comes to that." Thomas did not respond with argument or insult. He did not need to. His actions had already spoken. Instead, he nodded respectfully. "I understand your concern. I just ask that you judge me by my choices, not by your assumptions." Other neighbors began to murmur, some nodding in agreement with Jed, others shifting uncomfortably. Fear of the unknown was common in the frontier. Most people followed the rules of suspicion, believing it was safer to distrust those who were different. Thomas's behavior was unusual, and that made some uneasy. Despite the pressure from his neighbors, Thomas continued with his work. He refused to let their fear dictate his actions. Every decision he made was deliberate, guided by fairness and principle rather than by the expectations of others. While some townspeople watched skeptically, he moved with calm efficiency, tending to his animals, checking fences, and preparing supplies for his own household. Meanwhile, Ayana and Kai stayed nearby, observing the situation. Yana's expression was thoughtful. She had expected hostility, she had faced prejudice before. But she also saw that Thomas remained composed, unfazed by the criticism of others. That quiet strength impressed her even more than his earlier actions by the river. It was easy to act bravely when no one was watching, but to maintain that courage in front of scrutiny required something deeper. The neighbors' murmurs grew louder, some even questioning whether Thomas had violated unspoken rules of their community. One man, Henry, stepped forward. "You're putting everyone here in danger. If the law hears about this or if bandits come back, don't think we'll protect you." Thomas met Henry's gaze evenly. "I understand the risks. I will take responsibility for my actions. But I will not abandon someone in need because of fear or prejudice." His words were calm yet firm. He did not raise his voice or threaten. He did not seek to provoke. Instead, he relied on the clarity of his actions and the strength of his principles. The neighbors were left to judge him as they would, but Thomas had already made his choice. As the day progressed, a few townspeople decided to leave, muttering warnings about the dangers of associating with outsiders. But a few others remained, curious about Thomas's decisions. They observed quietly as he continued his work, noting how he treated Ayana and Kai with respect and care. He gave them space, guidance, and protection without making them feel powerless. Yana noticed this immediately. In every interaction, Thomas maintained fairness. He did not speak condescendingly, nor did he assume superiority. Instead, he acted as a protector and guide, offering support without imposing control. That approach built trust more effectively than words ever could. Later in the afternoon, Thomas gathered supplies and prepared for a brief journey into town to buy essential items for the ranch. Iana and Kai accompanied him, staying close but observing quietly. The streets of the town were dusty and narrow, with wooden buildings lining each side. Merchants called out to sell their goods, and townspeople went about their daily routines. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The word of Thomas's recent actions had traveled, and many people were watching to see what he would do next. At the trading post, Thomas was confronted by a man named Samuel who had been a friend once but now looked at him with suspicion. "So you're taking care of them?" Samuel asked, his tone sharp. "You know how people will talk. You could bring trouble to yourself and this town." Thomas replied with quiet honesty. "I am taking care of what needs to be taken care of. Fear should not decide our choices. Compassion and fairness should." Some people in the trading post whispered, while others watched silently. It was unusual for a man to act with such clarity and integrity in a world where survival often demanded suspicion or aggression. Thomas made his purchases efficiently, ignoring the stares and whispers. He carried himself with calm dignity, showing that he would not be swayed by fear or judgment. Outside the trading post, Ayana whispered to Kai, "See how he acts? He doesn't let anyone intimidate him. That is why he is different." Kai nodded, absorbing the lesson. He had learned that courage was not always about fighting. Sometimes it was about standing firm and doing what was right, even when others disagreed. As they returned to the ranch, Thomas took a slightly longer route to avoid any possible encounters with bandits or hostile neighbors. His careful planning ensured safety for all of them. On the trail, he continued to speak gently with Ayana and Kai, teaching them about the land, the paths, and the signs of animals and humans in the wilderness. Every lesson was practical, helping them navigate safely, but also carried an unspoken message. Knowledge and preparation were forms of strength. When they reached the ranch, Thomas ensured everything was secure before allowing Ayana and Kai to rest. He repaired fences, fed animals, and checked water supplies. Even after the long day, he did not show frustration or fatigue, only quiet determination. His behavior reinforced the lesson that responsibility, patience, and integrity were as important as courage and skill. That evening, as the sun set over the wide desert, Thomas and his guests sat together near the barn, eating a simple meal of bread, stew, and water. Ayana spoke quietly. "People in town, they don't understand why you helped us. Some of them are angry, others are afraid. Why do you care so much about what's right instead of what's easy?" Thomas looked at her thoughtfully. "Because what is easy is not always what is right. People will always be afraid of what they do not understand, but that does not mean we should act with fear. We must act with integrity and kindness, even if others do not understand." Ayana absorbed the words, realizing that Thomas's strength was not just in his physical skill or knowledge of the land. His true power came from his ability to stand firm in his values, to act with courage and compassion even when it was inconvenient or dangerous. As night fell, Thomas kept watch once again, walking along the edge of the property with his rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. He scanned the horizon for any sign of danger, alert but calm. Ayana and Kai slept peacefully, trusting him completely, because his actions had proven that he could be trusted. The events of the day left a lasting impression on Ayana. She understood that the frontier could be harsh, and that people could be cruel or suspicious. But she also saw that there were those who could rise above fear, those who could act with courage, kindness, and fairness. Thomas had shown her that true strength was measured not by force, but by integrity, patience, and the willingness to do what was right. By the end of the night, Thomas returned to his home inside the ranch, reflecting on the day's challenges. The whispers and suspicion of the town could not shake him. He knew that not everyone would understand his choices, but he also knew that helping those in need, without expecting reward or recognition, was worth every bit of judgment he faced. His actions were a quiet stand against the fear and prejudice that often governed life on the frontier. The next morning, Thomas prepared to resume his normal routines, confident that the lessons of the past days, trust, courage, and integrity, had begun to leave their mark on Ayana, Kai, and even on the townspeople who had witnessed his actions. He did not seek admiration or praise, only the satisfaction of knowing that he had acted rightly. In the months that followed, Ayana and her brother returned to visit the ranch occasionally, bringing small gifts of thanks and sharing stories of their own adventures and survival. Thomas welcomed them each time, reinforcing the lessons he had taught. That actions, not words, carried the most meaning, and that integrity and kindness could create bridges even in a land often ruled by fear. Through these experiences, the story of Thomas Hale spread quietly, inspiring some in the town to rethink their assumptions and leaving a lasting impression on the young Apache girl and her brother. They learned that courage and morality were not about dominance or force, but about standing firm in what was right, even when it was difficult, unpopular, or dangerous. And so, the ranch continued to be a place of hard work, safety, and quiet teaching. The frontier remained challenging, but Thomas's actions created a small ripple of trust and respect, reminding all who observed him that true strength was found not in words or weapons, but in careful, courageous action. The days after the visit from the townspeople were quiet, but Thomas Hale knew that peace on the frontier was never guaranteed. Word of his actions had spread far and wide. Some people admired him in secret, others criticized him openly, and a few whispered warnings of what might come. Yet Thomas did not let fear rule his life. He had acted rightly in helping Yana and her brother, and that was a choice he would stand by no matter the consequences. Yana and Kai had returned to their family temporarily, but they maintained contact with Thomas, bringing news of their travels and challenges. They spoke often about the lessons he had taught them, how to read the land, how to act with patience, and how to show courage even when it meant standing alone. His influence had already left a mark on them, shaping the way they approached their own lives. One morning, a small group of Apache warriors approached the edge of Thomas's ranch. Yana had sent word that her tribe would come to retrieve her and Kai, and to ensure they had returned safely. The sight of armed men caused tension in the town, as rumors of confrontation spread. Many townspeople feared conflict, remembering the long history of mistrust between settlers and the tribes. But Thomas was calm. He knew that this meeting could be tense, but he also knew that careful, honest action could prevent misunderstanding. Thomas walked out alone to meet them, unarmed, showing clearly that he came in peace. His movements were deliberate and calm, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. The warriors stopped at a respectful distance, their eyes studying him. They had heard stories from Yana about the rancher who had helped her and Kai, and they were cautious, expecting either danger or deceit. Thomas greeted them simply. "I have returned Yana and her brother safely. Nothing was taken, nothing harmed. I only wish to show that kindness and fairness are possible, even in difficult times." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Yana stepped forward, her face calm but proud. She spoke to her people, describing in detail how Thomas had helped them without expectation, how he had treated them with respect, and how he had chosen action over words. The warriors listened closely, noting the sincerity in her voice and the truth in her story. After careful discussion among themselves, the Apache leaders nodded. They accepted Thomas's explanation and acknowledged his courage and integrity. Yana's brother, Kai, beamed quietly, relieved that the situation had been resolved without conflict. For the first time in days, the tension that had weighed heavily on all of them lifted. Thomas walked back to his ranch, the encounter leaving him thoughtful. He knew that trust was fragile and easily broken, but he also saw that careful action and honesty could build bridges even across generations of fear and misunderstanding. He understood that his choices had consequences, not just for himself but for the wider community, and he felt a quiet sense of responsibility for what he had done. Over the following weeks, relationships began to change subtly. Small exchanges occurred between Thomas's ranch and Yana's tribe. Livestock were traded for woven goods, water sources were shared during dry spells, and information about approaching weather or dangers was passed along. These acts were small, yet they represented a significant shift in trust and cooperation. The frontier was still harsh, but moments of mutual respect began to grow where suspicion had once ruled. Yana visited the ranch often, accompanied by her younger brother, to continue learning from Thomas and to help with chores. She admired the way he worked with the land, treating every task with care and attention. Whether repairing fences, tending animals, or preparing food, Thomas acted with purpose and patience. He did not seek recognition or praise. His satisfaction came from doing the work correctly and helping those around him. Kai, too, learned quickly. He watched Thomas carefully, absorbing lessons in observation, responsibility, and action. The young boy began to understand that courage was not only about physical strength, but also about integrity, patience, and the ability to make difficult decisions without fear of judgment. The townspeople slowly began to notice the changes as well. Some who had been skeptical before started to recognize Thomas's fairness and reliability. They saw that his actions had created stability on the frontier, and that cooperation, not suspicion, could improve life for everyone. While not all attitudes shifted immediately, seeds of respect and understanding were planted, growing slowly over time. One afternoon, a messenger arrived at the ranch with news from a distant settlement. A group of settlers had encountered danger. A herd of wild animals had strayed onto their lands, threatening crops and livestock. Thomas immediately gathered supplies and mounted his horse. He invited Yana and Kai to accompany him, teaching them that helping others was not only an act of courage but also a responsibility. As they rode, Thomas explained how to approach the situation carefully. "Observe first," he said. "Understand the problem, then act." Rash decisions often make matters worse. His lessons were practical, but they carried deeper meaning as well. They taught patience, analysis, and empathy, qualities that would serve Ayanna and Kai throughout their lives. Upon arrival, Thomas and the group carefully guided the animals back to safer grazing lands, ensuring no harm came to the settlers, crops, or livestock. The settlers were initially wary of the Apache children accompanying Thomas, but they quickly recognized their skill and composure. By the end of the day, the situation was resolved peacefully, and mutual respect had grown between all parties involved. Returning to the ranch, Ayanna spoke quietly to Thomas. "I never imagined the world could be different. I thought people would always act out of fear or anger, but you've shown me that courage and kindness can change everything." Thomas smiled gently. "It takes practice and choice. Every day, every action matters. You have the ability to carry these lessons forward and make a difference yourself." Days turned into weeks, and the seasons began to shift. The ranch remained busy, with Thomas working tirelessly to maintain the land and care for the animals. Ayanna and Kai continued their visits, learning, assisting, and growing stronger with each passing day. The bonds between the rancher and the Apache family deepened, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a brilliant array of oranges, reds, and purples, Thomas and Ayanna sat quietly by the barn. The air was still, filled only with the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. Ayanna reflected on all that had happened, the dangers, the kindness, the lessons, and the trust that had been built. "You've taught me more than I could have imagined," she said softly. "Not just about the land or survival or safety, but about people and what they are capable of when they choose to act rightly." Thomas nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Life on the frontier is full of challenges, but it also gives us the chance to act with courage, patience, and kindness. Those choices matter more than most people realize. You and Kai will carry these lessons, and maybe one day the world will be a little better because of them." Ayanna smiled, understanding the depth of his words. The frontier was harsh, often unforgiving and full of uncertainty, but moments like these reminded her that humanity could shine through, even in the toughest times. She knew she would never forget the rancher who had chosen action over words, integrity over fear, and courage over indifference. As night fell completely, Thomas kept watch again, the desert quiet and still around him. The stars shone brightly, and a gentle wind stirred the leaves of the few trees near the ranch. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that the choices he had made had ripple effects far beyond the immediate moment. Ayanna and Kai slept peacefully nearby, and the land itself seemed to rest in a fragile but genuine peace. Over the following months, Ayanna's tribe and Thomas's ranch continued to exchange knowledge, resources, and support. When the desert faced droughts, storms, or other hardships, they shared supplies and guidance. Small acts of cooperation grew into a foundation of trust that benefited both communities. The frontier remained unpredictable, but these connections strengthened resilience and understanding. Thomas never sought recognition. He did not act for praise, reward, or fame. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that he had done what was right, that he had helped those in need, and that he had acted with integrity when it mattered most. For Ayanna and Kai, the lessons he imparted went far beyond survival skills. They learned that courage was about moral strength, that kindness could change lives, and that integrity mattered even when others doubted or criticized. Years later, the story of Thomas Hale's quiet courage was told by Ayanna and her family. It became a tale of the frontier, not about battles or power, but about choices, integrity, and the quiet, steady courage that could change lives. People remembered him as the rancher who helped without expectation, who acted with thoughtfulness, and who showed that action could speak far louder than words. In the end, the frontier remained as harsh and challenging as ever. But for those who had known Thomas Hale, the land was also a place of possibility, of trust, and of the quiet power of doing what is right. And the memory of a man who chose action over words continued to inspire those who heard his story, reminding them that true courage is not always loud, and true strength is not always measured by force, but by patience, integrity, and the willingness to stand by what is right.